Tonight at 10, the government announces new measures to tackle a rise in the Indian coronavirus variant in the UK. A surge rapid response team is being deployed in Bolton. Across the UK, the number of cases has more than doubled in a week. Bolton has the most new infections, particularly among the young. The speed of infections is said to be concerning.
It is a variant of concern. We are anxious about it. It has been spreading.
The Health Secretary says the situation is being monitored very carefully and the government will not hesitate to take further action if necessary. Also tonight, Palestinian families flee their homes in Gaza amid fears of a ground invasion by Israeli forces massed on the border. Palestinian militants continue firing barrages of rockets at Tel Aviv.
This is a painful day.
David Cameron insists he broke no rules as he is grilled by MPs over his controversial lobbying of government figures on behalf of a financial company which has collapsed. British tourists due to fly to Portugal from next week may not be able to go now as Portugal extends its COVID alert level until the end of the month. And why Elon Musk and his electric Tesla cars have sent the value of Bitcoin tumbling over concerns about fossil fuels.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, more protests at Old Trafford. Manchester United fans make their feelings known about the club's owners ahead of their match against Liverpool.
Good evening. The number of cases of an Indian COVID variant have more than doubled in the UK in the past week. More than 1,300 cases have been reported in England alone. Most of the cases are in the northwest of England and some in London. The Prime Minister says he is anxious about the rise in cases and says the government is ruling nothing out in tackling the situation. Tonight's additional surge testing is being deployed to areas such as Bolton, which has one of the highest number of cases, mostly among the under-25s. And the government is considering bringing forward second vaccine doses for some. From Bolton, our correspondent Dominic Hughes reports.
All right, sharp scratch.
Surge testing and now an extra push on vaccinations is underway in Bolton.
You have it in the right hand, my love.
This is a part of town that's seen a spike in infections. 553 new cases in a week, more than doubling the infection rate.
All done. We're doing about just over 300 vaccines a day.
The concerns are around the unknowns. How many cases are linked to the variant that originated in India and how far has it spread?
The variant from India seemed to appear around the time that our rates started to rise. What we haven't really got the full detail on is to what extent the rise is down to that, because that's why we're doing all the surge testing in part. We've got lots of sites across Bolton that allow people without symptoms to be tested, and we really need them to do that because we need to get right down to the detail of what variants are in our community.
Next week, most students will be able to stop wearing masks in schools, but not here at the academy where the vaccinations are being carried out.
In light of the spike in this local area, it's really important that we continue wearing face masks for the next few weeks. I think it's important we all do our bit to keep each other safe, and that's the number one priority of any principal at any school, so the masks will continue.
Bolton has been here before. Only a few weeks last summer were free of restrictions.
Follow the rules, wear a face covering.
The worry is that areas now seeing infections surge could find themselves subject to yet more local lockdowns.
It is a variant of concern. We are anxious about it. It has been spreading, but we want to make sure that we take all the prudential, all the cautious steps now that we could take.
The latest government data on cases linked to the Indian variant show they have more than doubled in a week to over 1,300, many of them found here in the northwest of England. Now that figure does sound alarming and certainly the rise is startling, but when compared to the total number of cases, well, that figure is still relatively small.
Well, we've predicted that there will be new variants emerging.
And experts say there's no sign yet the Indian variant poses a much greater threat.
We will see variants that escape or evade antibodies to some extent, but the vaccines do a lot of things and they protect us in many different ways. So I'd say this is something for scientists, public health people and government to worry about rather than individuals. The only thing a person in the street needs to worry about is getting vaccinated as soon as they can and when they're offered it to take both doses.
There's been no change in national policy on who gets the vaccine, despite council leaders calling for more freedom to respond to local outbreaks. So far, vaccines remain highly effective. But new variants are the biggest threat to the path out of lockdown.
You might feel a bit sore for a couple of days, all right?
Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Bolton.
NHS waiting lists in England have risen again to the highest levels on record because of the backlog caused by the pandemic. Just under 5 million people are waiting for hospital treatment. More than 400,000 have been waiting for more than a year. NHS England has allocated £160 million to fund extra clinics at weekends and virtual assessments as part of a trial scheme to help tackle the backlog. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
Susan needs 2 knee replacements. She's waited since the start of last year for the first one and still no date's been offered. She's a primary school teacher but has now had to stay off work.
I kept going all last year, kept going through lockdown, through everything else. But unfortunately, it's come to this year and I couldn't carry on.
She really wants to get back in the classroom.
I am upset and I do feel that I've let the children down, although it's out of my hands and it isn't my fault.
Just one example of how jobs and everyday lives are blighted by long waits for NHS treatment. The total waiting for non-urgent operations in England in March was about 9% of the whole population. In Scotland it was 8% in December, the latest available figures. In Wales it was 17% in February, and in Northern Ireland 23% of the population was on a waiting list, according to data in December. So what are the solutions? Well, money is being made available to some hospitals in England who've come up with ideas for using technology and smarter ways of working to get more operations done and more patients off the waiting list.
Your walking is great today.
Bristol's Southmead Hospital is one of them, with a range of new plans.
And we're trying to get more people through clinics now by increasing our numbers of face-to-face and also virtual appointments. And then as regards theatre operating, we're increasing the number of lists and extending the list for longer time, going into the evenings and hopefully using weekends as well.
I'm sorry I'm not there with you. How are you feeling?
Rebecca, who's a surgeon, is talking via video link to Julia, who had a complex ankle operation.
So lovely, if I turn it around.
What's in effect an iPad on wheels provides the sound and pictures. It's called Hospital at Home and allows doctors to monitor Julia from a distance.
Because of the Hospital at Home team, I was able to come out that much earlier. And I suppose I was able to leave a bed for somebody else. And I could come home to my own bed, which has been a sheer delight, I can tell you.
NHS England said operations were back to 80% of pre-pandemic levels. Staff are working flat out, but there's a huge backlog of work which could take years to get through. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The latest data shows there were 2,657 new COVID infections in the past 24 hours, with 11 deaths recorded. More than 35.9 million people have now had their first dose of a vaccine. That's over 68% of the UK's adult population. More than 18.5 million people have had both jabs, so more than 35% of all adults are now fully vaccinated. Portugal has extended its coronavirus alert level until the end of May, raising questions over whether people from the UK will be able to travel there from next week. Portugal is one of just 12 countries on the UK's green list, which means you don't have to quarantine on return. Thousands of people have booked flights from Monday. Our transport correspondent Caroline Davis joins me now, and it's a very confusing situation for people, particularly those who are booked to go out on Monday.
It is, Sophie. In fact, there are over 20 departures due to take off from the UK to Portugal on Monday. Let's be clear to start with, though. The Portuguese government hasn't announced either way whether it's going to let UK tourists into the country on Monday the 17th. But bear in mind that is just over 3 days away. As you say, the Green List was announced last week. Only 12 countries and territories on there, including places like Australia and New Zealand, which are not allowing British tourists in at the moment. So the industry has really staked its hopes on Portugal. We heard today that Portugal has decided to extend the state of calamity, as it calls it, until the 30th of May. Non-essential travel is currently not allowed into Portugal, and when the Cabinet Minister was asked if UK tourists would be allowed in on the 17th, she said, "I have no information to give yet." What she did give information about was the UEFA Champions League final, which is due to be played in Portugal on the 29th of May. Anyone who is coming over from the UK will have to go in chartered flights, she said. They'll have to leave within the same day, within 48 hours, and remain in what she called a bubble situation. Plenty in the travel industry desperately waiting to hear whether Portugal is going to open up. Key thing here is quite how volatile this situation is for international travel.
Indeed. Caroline, thank you. Well, the BBC understands the Welsh Government is going to advise people not to go on foreign holidays, even after rules on international travel are changed. The traffic light system of green, amber and red countries will be introduced from Monday, alongside other changes to lockdown laws. Well, let's get more now from our Wales correspondent, Hal Griffith. Tell us more.
Yes, we expect an announcement tomorrow, but I understand that Wales will adopt the same traffic light system as England and Scotland, but we will come with a very big caveat. The official advice from the Welsh Government is not to travel to any foreign countries unless it is essential. Now, while that means a foreign holiday wouldn't be illegal in a red, amber or green country, it would certainly be against the advice. Clearly, they want people to stay in the UK for now, at least. Also tomorrow, we expect confirmation that pubs, bars and restaurants can serve indoors. Cinemas, theatres and bingo halls can open their doors. Then on June the 7th, if COVID rates continue to be low, then more people can see each other within each other's homes. However, we don't have a date yet for when potentially social contact limits will end. And the question of the cwtch, the Welsh word for a hug. We don't know yet if there'll be advice on allowing people to embrace. No signal at the moment that the Welsh Government wants to change social distancing laws here.
Thank you. Israeli forces are massing on the border with Gaza, where many civilians are fleeing their homes amid fears of a ground invasion. Israel has continued its airstrikes on Gaza, where people say they endured the hardest night of airstrikes since the 2014 war. Now, 103 Palestinians have been reported killed there since Monday. 7 people have died in Israel. Palestinian militants have continued firing barrages of rockets at several target cities across Israel, and sectarian clashes between Jewish and Arab citizens who live side by side on the streets of Tel Aviv, Lod and beyond have intensified amid warnings of civil war. From Jerusalem, here's our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
Palestinian families are fleeing their homes in northern Gaza this evening. They told the BBC they were escaping heavy Israeli shell fire. Dozens of civilians were killed in their area in the 2014 war, so they left in a hurry, with their children still in the new clothes they're given for the end of Ramadan. One man said, "The criminal occupation shows them no mercy." A renewal of the war between Hamas and Israel was always likely. The unexpected front line on the streets of Israel was not. Sectarian violence between Israeli citizens brings a new and vicious dimension. Not all Israelis are Jews, around 20% are Palestinian Arabs. Young men have been on the prowl for people to attack. Jews versus Arabs, Arabs against Jews, all Israeli citizens. Israel's president warned that the country should not abandon itself to civil war. As for the other war, it was a day for decisions. Among the Hamas leaders assassinated by Israel this week were top commanders. Will that deter another escalation? Probably not. Israel has to decide whether it wants to follow artillery and air attacks with a ground assault against Hamas inside Gaza. That has been part of the pattern during 15 years of intermittent warfare between them. Israel has called up 7,000 reservists. In Jerusalem, tens of thousands of Palestinians came to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's holiest place after Mecca and Medina. In this city, religion is intertwined with politics, nationalism and power. The banners celebrate Hamas and its leaders. who wanted the people there to see them as the only true guardians of Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. It was Eid al-Fitr, the holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. It's meant to be a party. Parents tried to make it fun. There is nothing right now to celebrate for the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas, upstaged by his Hamas rivals. No peace, security or stability is possible, he said, while Jerusalem is occupied by Israel. This war might just save Benjamin Netanyahu's career. He was about to lose his job last weekend. He's still in political trouble, but now he has soldiers to congratulate, and his rivals are quiet. The Prime Minister said the fight against Hamas would take time, but Israel would decisively restore quiet. It is a modest war aim. He will need more to tell Israelis before this can end. Especially in Sderot, the town closest to Gaza. A 5-year-old boy was killed when a rocket hit his building. His neighbors have had enough.
It's very, very difficult to live under these circumstances, and the government should wipe out Gaza, once and for all.
Right across Israel and the occupied territories this week there is serious violence. This was the town of Hebron on the occupied West Bank. Young Palestinians and Israelis confronting each other. Another generation cursed by the failures of its leaders.
Well, let's talk to our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, in Jerusalem. And what is the way out of this, Jeremy?
Well, short-term, diplomacy is ramping up. Envoys are on the way. They're talking a bit, but it's looking more like escalation. The thing about the Israelis and Hamas is that it is familiar. There will be a ceasefire. It's a question of how many people are going to die first, and will it change anything? Now, the sectarian violence is something completely different. That is something which is unknown. On that, they're into a whole new world, and it's a whole new complication in the conflict as well. So that's something, I think, which is a big new factor that is not going to go away, and that is why they are so worried about it. There's a synagogue on fire tonight. There are more scenes of violence and intimidation in the streets, more security forces going there too, and I think a really big headache for the Israeli government, confronted by trouble on all sides.
Jeremy Bowen in Jerusalem. Thank you. David Cameron has said he believes he was acting in the public interest when he lobbied ministers and senior civil servants on behalf of the collapsed financial company Greensill Capital. The former Prime Minister, giving evidence to MPs, faced a series of uncomfortable questions, but he again insisted he had not broken any rules. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg was watching.
Money, power, and how it moves around. The former Prime Minister used his phone book to push the case for his employer along to the Treasury, to the Bank of England, arguing for a now failed city firm, Greensill Capital, to take part in emergency loans last year. David Cameron's role was hidden from view. The texts and emails emerged after weeks of relative silence. So too has he.
This is a painful day.
Admitting at the start he could have acted differently, but adamant he did nothing wrong.
Nothing I did was in breach of the rules. But on the wider test of what is appropriate, as I've said previously, it would be better only to use the most formal means of contact via a letter.
David Cameron went to work for Greensill after leaving office. Last year, he appealed repeatedly to former colleagues for the firm to be part of a scheme giving out emergency loans. Lobbying is allowed, but it's meant to be transparent. And there were nearly 60 attempts to get in touch. A message to the Chancellor, Rishi, David Cameron here. Can I have a very quick word? Call any time. And then his old friend, Michael Gove. Do you have a moment? I'm on this number and very free. The Treasury rejected the request, but Greensill, which has now gone under, was allowed to give out millions of pounds of government-backed loans through a separate scheme. MPs this afternoon were determined to wrinkle Mr Cameron's smooth reputation.
Do you not feel that you have demeaned yourself and your position by WhatsApping your way around Whitehall?
What I did at the time of economic crisis was put to the government what I genuinely believed to be a good idea for how to get money into the hands of small businesses.
It's been an embarrassing afternoon for the man who used to run the country, coy about how much he was being paid or how often he used the company's jet. But David Cameron did deny that he knew that Greensill was in big trouble at the beginning of the pandemic when he was sending all of those texts.
They're more like stalking than lobbying. Looking back, aren't you at least a little bit embarrassed about the way you behaved?
We thought we had a good idea. I was keen to get it in front of government. But as I've said, there are lessons to learn and lessons for me to learn.
There are several investigations into Greensill, but the firm's failure begs questions about how influence, as well as money, can be part of trade. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
India is still in the grip of the coronavirus pandemic, with more than 4,000 deaths recorded in the past 24 hours alone. India currently accounts for half of all global cases and almost a third of all deaths worldwide. One of the states seeing the sharpest increase in numbers is West Bengal. From the state's capital, Kolkata, Yogita Lamai reports.
1,000 miles from Delhi, Kolkata. Look at this. A frighteningly busy market in a region where COVID has surged nearly 80 times in the past 2 months. People here are scared, but they have to work to eat. And this is the cost. In the entrance of a public hospital nearby, people are already struggling to get basic care. All the beds here, hundreds, are already full. And the sick keep coming. I don't know how long we can continue like this, says Dr. Kuldeep Bottabhyal. Even a war comes to an end. But here, it's wave after wave. 1 in 6 people in the world live in India. And Kolkata is among its most densely populated cities. COVID has reached places where families live together in one-room homes. Distancing is impossible. Amit and Aarti Parshad's 63-year-old father died of COVID. They spent the only money they had to try to save him. As it spreads unchecked, the virus is taking on new, more worrying forms. The highly infectious variant that's spreading through India has now reached more than 40 countries around the world, including the UK. This is not an Indian problem. What's happening here could affect the world's ability to recover from the pandemic. I spoke to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the World Health Organization's chief scientist. Why should the world care about what's happening in India right now?
This virus does not respect borders. It doesn't respect nationalities. It spreads before you know that it is spreading. If the virus keeps on replicating and multiplying, the number of variants is going to keep increasing, and these variants will ultimately spread across the world. We will not be able to stop that from happening.
The only way out is to immunize this vast population. But vaccine supply is critically low. This country will need billions of doses. It's hard to see how it can do it alone. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, Kolkata.
Police Scotland have released 2 men, both Indian nationals, after a mass protest on the streets of Glasgow after the men were detained in a van by immigration officers. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, blamed the situation on the Home Office. Our Scotland correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
A Glasgow community united. 2 men believed to be Indian Sikhs were taken from a flat and placed in this Home Office immigration van. For hours there was a peaceful but determined standoff between police and protesters. One under the van to stop it from moving.
I think people are really standing in solidarity, and they don't want to see their neighbours treated like this, because these are our neighbours.
More police officers moved in as preparations were made for the two men to be released.
Today, Glasgow community has united to basically say this is unacceptable. The two men are being released into my custody. They will not be arrested, they will not be detained, and they'll be released.
This moment followed conversations between the Home Office and the Scottish Government. Nicola Sturgeon said doing this on Eid in a Muslim community in the midst of coronavirus was staggeringly irresponsible. The Home Office said it was in relation to suspected immigration offences.
After a day of protests here in Glasgow and a very heavy police presence, the two men who spent the day in the back of that van are now out and heading towards a local mosque.
The crowds followed, and there was a sense of celebration.
I am over the moon to see those guys walk out of that van, and everyone was peaceful in this.
They stuck their heads out and they had the biggest smiles and they were thanking us.
Tonight, the Scottish Government expressed its anger about what happened. The Home Office said the men have been released on bail pending further investigation. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Glasgow.
The value of Bitcoin, the world's biggest digital currency, has tumbled after Elon Musk, the chief executive of Tesla, said the electric car company would no longer accept the cryptocurrency as payment. And it's all because of fossil fuels. Our chief environment correspondent, Justin Rolat, is here to explain. Justin.
Yep, Sophie, there are real concerns about the environmental impact of these cryptocurrencies. You will, of course, have heard of Bitcoin, the biggest crypto of them all. It has seen its value soar in recent years. Look at this. You could have picked one up for $1, 70p 10 years ago. Recently, Bitcoin hit a peak of $68,000. And that is in part because of support from Elon Musk, the boss of Tesla. The electric car company said it would accept bitcoins for car purchases in March this year. But today, Mr. Musk performed a screeching U-turn. Tesla has suspended vehicle purchases using Bitcoin, he tweeted. We are concerned about rapidly increasing use of fossil fuels for Bitcoin mining and transactions, especially coal, which has the worst emissions of any fuel. And it's true, Bitcoin relies on the use of staggering amounts of energy, much of it from fossil fuels. That is because of the way Bitcoin is produced or mined. It's like a kind of lottery run every 10 minutes. Computers around the world compete to create a record of every transaction ever made in Bitcoin. They also have to guess a random number. Get there first and you win the prize. 6 1/4 Bitcoins, today worth £250,000. The idea is the more computers verifying transactions, the more secure the currency is. And with such big cash on offer, huge numbers of people are getting in on the game. The effort they are making is truly enormous. Bitcoin miners make some 160 quintillion calculations every second. That is 160 followed by 18 zeros. And that takes a huge amount of electricity. The UK uses just over 300 terawatt hours of electricity a year. At current rates, Bitcoin is using around 150 terawatt hours a year. So that's half of what the UK uses and about 0.5% of total world electricity use.
We have a system with millions of devices all around the world that are constantly generating a whole load of useless computations and using a whole load of energy in doing that, while Bitcoin is in essence still very small at the moment.
And researchers say at least 2/3 of that will have been generated from fossil fuel, which is why Bitcoin is such a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions, something you may want to consider if you're thinking of buying the so-called currency, and also something that would make scaling it up to be a world currency on a par with the dollar or the euro a real challenge. Sophie.
Justin, thank you. Now, for decades, Sir Alex Ferguson dominated the British football landscape, leading Manchester United to unprecedented success. 8 years after retiring, Sir Alex is now the subject of a new film, charting his extraordinary life and his recovery from a brain hemorrhage in 2018. The film has been directed by his son, Jason. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, has been speaking to both of them at Old Trafford.
Sir Alex, tell me, what was it like revisiting the most important moments of your life, both good and bad?
In my career, I never use reflection as part of my management. I always look forward, and the next day was the most important day to me. The reflection was quite powerful for me, you know, realising this. God, did we do that?
Recounting his journey from his working class roots in Glasgow, Sir Alex Ferguson Never Give In, released later this month, follows the iconic Scotsman's playing and managerial career, as well as the more personal side of a man who won it all.
The impossible dream made possible. I didn't want to fail. I couldn't fail. That was always a driving force for me. Football management is such a sacrifice that you don't have time for family.
Did you feel a sense of great responsibility, Jason, to do your father's remarkable career justice?
Yeah, I did, but then I quite quickly flipped that from the point of view of looking at it and utilising the relationship that we have as a tool to make something that was very personal and intimate.
Ambulance service. My dad is collapsed. Alexander Ferguson.
And for the first time, the circumstances surrounding the devastating brain hemorrhage that Ferguson suffered 3 years ago are revealed.
I tried to get out of my bed and just collapsed. I fell against the shoe rack and all the shoes fell out and made a noise. And Kathy, fortunately, was downstairs. She came up and I don't remember a thing from then. I was lucky.
What was your greatest fear at that moment?
My memory, without doubt. If I've lost my memory, it's not me. And then when I lost my voice, I was a bit terrified, to be honest with you. If I go tomorrow, I'll be grateful for the 3 years extra I had.
The film ends with Ferguson's defining triumph in the 1999 final of the Champions League, a competition recently threatened by the proposed European Super League. United's fans storming Old Trafford in protest at the role of the club's owners in the failed plot.
What did you make of that, and what's happened since?
Every club should have that dream. You cannot ever forget that the real reason for football is that as small as a guy can climb to the top of Everest. We can't do without that.
Something would be lost.
Lost.
Ferguson won 38 trophies over more than a quarter of a century at United. The complete control he had at Old Trafford, increasingly rare in management today, with the shift towards player power.
They are more fragile. They need more care. It's become a more protective life.
Do you think that you would find it harder if starting your managerial career today?
Personally, I don't think so. I think that personality to do well, and the drive to do well, and the hunger and the energy, the good ones will find a way.
And you can see the full interview on the BBC iPlayer. But that's it from us. Good night.